Hey everybody, and welcome to This Woman Can. Thank you so much for joining me. I am your host, Janice Sutherland, and this week we are in conversation with Ambassador Joan H Underwood. She's a senior management consultant and policy advisor with extensive experience in both public and private sectors. Highly credentialed, Joan has worn many hats, including senior professional in human resources, accredited director and master trainer, Ericsson professional coach. She's also served as a facilitator, get my words out, and subject matter expert in the Cave Hill School of Business at the University of West Indies Executive Diploma in Management and the Executive MBA programs. In addition to her work coaching, management and policy, Joan served for 7.5 years as Antigua Barbuda's non-resident ambassador to several Latin American countries. And last but not least, Joan is a newly published author of Manager's First Aid Kit, described by Melange magazine as the ultimate tool for self-development that every aspiring or current manager should have within their possession. Whoa, Joan, you make me tired just reading that. Welcome, and how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for this invitation, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Fabulous. Delighted to have you join me. Now, as I said, you have been a woman of many hats, many hats.
Yes.
But tell me, what drove you to consider or to have so many reinventions?
You know, it's an interesting question. And I recently was being interviewed, and I said that I was pivoting before pivoting was a thing. And some of it was intentional, yes, but some of this was by circumstance.
Okay.
So my first career was in the healthcare sector, in laboratory medicine in particular.
Right.
And that pivot away from being a lab tech was due to the fact that I realized that it was taking a toll on me that was not sustainable.
Right.
That was one of the primary driving factors. And there were two primary factors. I'll tell you about the unsustainable toll. I found myself getting emotionally caught up in the health issues of the patients that I was dealing with.
Okay.
Right. So one of the things that I did was diagnose cancer and precancerous lesions.
Right.
And the prevalence of advanced cancer was so high. And when you're from a small society, you either know the people or know someone who knows the people. And so I was getting too emotionally invested. Right. In these people who were becoming ill. And so I was seeing them come from late diagnosis and ultimately pass away. And I said, if I continue to ride this emotional roller coaster, it's not going to be healthy for me. Right. So that was one consideration. The second consideration is that as a technician, I was frustrated by what I perceived then to be inadequate policy and management. And so that first pivot was away from being a technician to doing my first master's degree in health services management and policy. Because I'm like, if I'm managing, I'm one step removed from the clinical work.
Right.
And so then I can safeguard my own mental and emotional well-being,
yeah,
and have a positive impact. Because with better policy and management, then we can diagnose people earlier, and then the outcomes could be better. So that was the first pivot.
Right. So when you've gone through your process, your pivot, your reinvention, transition, whatever we wish to call them, what do you think has been maybe the core motivator for making those changes?
To make a better contribution.
Right.
Which is why I went from technician to management and policy. And in some cases, the self-care.
Right. Yeah. I'm not going to argue with that, the self-care bit. Not going to argue about that at all. So what would you say, Joan, has been your greatest change, your greatest transition or pivot?
I think that would have been when I left an executive, a C-suite position in the private sector, and went to work in the public sector full-time as a political appointee. So there's like zero job security associated with that move, in addition to the fact that it's a significant loss of income.
Yes.
So that was extremely impactful.
Yeah. And to me, all that sprung into my head when you said that was like, wow, that is a complete 180, like, just complete swap around. So what do you think were the transferable skills that helped you to make that change or adapt to that different environment?
Okay. It was my success as an executive and also as an advocate that led to the offer being made, because I had served previously as the president of the Employers Federation. And so I was very involved in the, lobbying for proper policy and economic representation, etc., within the society. Then in terms of my substantive executive role, I was an HR practitioner for a financial conglomerate and had a fairly good track record in terms of how the HR function was structured within that organization. And so it was then Prime Minister Spencer, having, seen me in the public life, reached out to me and asked me to come and work with him full-time in the office of the Prime Minister, because he was one of his main platforms in that second term was public sector transformation. And he wanted someone who had some sensitivity around the HR function to spearhead that transition, rather than having it, as happens in some countries, it resides within the Ministry of Finance. So they're purely economic imperatives that drive the agenda. And PM Spencer, being a lifelong trade unionist, he wanted to ensure that the people side of public sector transformation was adequately taken care of.
Excellent. Now, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but we're women of a certain age where we've had life, and just from all the stuff you said you've done, we're not going to hide the fact that we've lived. Yeah.
Oh, not at all. I'm very proud of it.
So what do you think is unique about pivoting careers midlife? What are the challenges and opportunities that you feel arise?
I think one of the biggest things that I've had to be very mindful of as I negotiated later transitions is the perception that we have a best due by date. Right?
Yes.
That, okay, should we take the chance on her? We're not likely to get as much out of her as we would out of someone who was younger. Right? So that's something that I've always had to prepare myself mentally in terms of going into negotiations. Don't wait for someone to put you on the defensive. But come in with a strong offense in terms of why this is a strength. And so you would have noticed in my bio that it mentions right up front, I put numbers on it, right? I'm not shy about saying how much experience I have, but the diversity of the experience. And so in the conversation, I show how those multiple roles can be leveraged to the benefit of whoever is making the hiring decision.
Fabulous. So it's more about quality than longevity when we start talking about why you should hire me when we're at a certain stage of life.
And just showing in terms of the transferability, as you alluded to, the transferability of skills. So and again, having worked in HR for a number of years, I know how to have the conversations to persuade you that I'm a good fit. Right? So, I was mentoring a young executive just within the past couple of weeks, and she sent me her cover letter and her CV. And I went back to her and I said, look, they gave you the job description. So it's not as if you don't know what they're looking for. They gave you all the competencies. And I said, I believe in working smart, not working hard.
Mm.
So when I scan your application, I scan it for these competencies. You didn't mention them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Why are you leaving me to do the work, to look at what you've provided and see how well it matches up with what I'm looking for?
Absolutely.
So I'm very adept at taking what it is you say you're looking at and then telling a story about my CV that aligns perfectly with what you need.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So when you've embarked on your reinventions, Joan, is there anything or is it one piece of advice you wish you'd received that would have helped you each time you went to reinvent yourself?
Well, in the earlier stages, because I sort of figured it out later on and had champions and sponsors who helped me to understand it. Because, being socialized as a girl coming up in Caribbean society, we were taught to be humble. And my grandmother, who is, the ultimate role model for me, she taught me that self-praise was no kind of praise. That's the only thing she ever taught me that I've rejected later on.
Yeah.
Right? Because I realized I can't wait for other people to sing my praises.
Yes. Yeah.
I have to be comfortable doing it myself. Not talking about what I've done in a self-deprecating way, but I did good here. And I'm going to tell you about that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you about it in a way that's not about being boastful, but about showing you impact and how effective I can be. And I'm willing to bring that to the table and leverage it on your behalf.
Yeah. And it's a I don't want to say a complaint, but it's a challenge I hear many women face about about being comfortable with self-promotion, but I always say, if you don't talk about you, who's going to do it as well as you? And tell your story. So for any woman that's facing that challenge or feeling uncomfortable, feeling like it's icky, or I've even heard it called sleazy to talk about myself, I'm selling myself. What piece of advice would you share to help someone navigate that particular challenge?
Well, I'm coming right at that person with some tough love and tell them, get over it. Because the men who are competing for the job that you want have no qualms about bigging themselves up, embellishing a bit.
Yes,
so you go in there and tell your story.
Yeah.
If you want this.
Yeah.
If you're indifferent, if you don't feel that strongly about it, well, then continue what you do.
Yeah.
But if you want to really be competitive, if you want to be taken seriously, you got to go to bat for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
You really do.
Yeah. And like you said, I think we've learned how to do that. Maturity has its advantages.
Indeed.
And we face enough knockbacks to know, well, actually, you're not going to do this for me. I need to advocate for myself.
Exactly. And something else that I think is important for women as you negotiate your pivots later in life is to be willing to walk away.
Yes.
Rather than be taken advantage of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rather than sell yourself short.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, as a consultant, I've had international consulting firms who've seen my work, approach me about being on a team with them. And when I quote my fees, they say, oh, that's more than we've budgeted. And I tell them, I could recommend some other people for you.
Mm-hmm. And that's being really comfortable with knowing your worth.
Absolutely.
Definitely knowing your worth. Because like you said, I've walked away from roles. I'm like, no, somebody out there. I always say there's 7.8 billion people out in the world. One of them's going to like me.
And see what you bring to the table and value it.
Exactly.
And there's some organizations which genuinely can't afford it. And don't get me wrong, I discount my fees for regional governments, or if it's an NGO or community-based organization, I can volunteer work. Yeah. But if we're talking about the private sector or a multilateral development agency or something like that, then no, this is my fee. And I've done my research, so I know that it's competitive based on what it is that you want to accomplish. And so there's a conversation that I have if people start quibbling about fees. I said, listen, there are many different modes of transportation. Okay, let's say we're talking about cars. You can have a Suzuki Swift, you can have a Toyota, midline vehicle, or you can have a Lexus or a Mercedes. I said, I'm not your Suzuki Swift person. So if that's what you're looking for, I can make some recommendations for you.
Right.
I said, I'm in the upper line Toyota, not the mid-range, the upper, and I don't put myself in the Lexus or Mercedes because I do know that I still have room to grow there.
Okay. We were going to have words then.
What's that?
We were going to have words then.
And so I put it on the table and I said, listen, I am confident enough about the quality of work that I will do for you. That I will stand by my fee and guarantee you that you will be satisfied in the event that you choose to go this route. But if it's not within your budget, that's okay. And I've had international firms walk away from me because I refuse to discount my fees and then come back later with a subsequent project and pay the fee.
Right.
So you really need to have the confidence to stand your ground.
Excellent. So I totally agree with you there. So, Joan, when you've gone through these changes, or when you're going to change careers, or when you're going to make that pivot, do you ever get that? What do you fear? What do you fear most when you're going to make those changes?
These days or before?
Oh, good question. Let's start with before, and let's see how it's changed to these days.
Okay, because let me tell you, major concerns about imposter syndrome, in the olden days. Right? Because the nature of the work that I do with these pivots is that I'm always going into something new.
Yes.
Right? So yes, I have transferable skills, but I haven't done that exact thing before.
Right.
So it's always something new. It's not been done before. Generally, it's setting something up. So there's the excitement, because I love startups. There's the excitement of the startup, and then there's the little quiver and uncertainty. Do you have this all figured out? Do you know exactly how you need to do this? And of course, you don't know exactly. But I always say, listen, by the time that they figure out that I don't know what I'm doing, I will know what I'm doing.
Right.
So, now, because I've had a number of successful pivots under my belt, right now, imposter syndrome isn't so much of an issue anymore, if at all.
Right.
It's the excitement of, let me see what I can do with this now. What's the legacy going to be from this one?
Yeah. Fabulous. So we've kind of painted a picture that everything could be, it's been smooth transitions. We've overcome the challenges and stuff like that. But I know, we have experience. We've had a few doors close in our face. But Joe, what positive difference has failure made in your life?
Well, let me tell you, my biggest failure was my most productive learning period.
Okay.
Right. And so I told you about the pivot going from a C-suite position to the public sector position as a political appointee, where you have no security of tenure.
Yes.
And so that was a bit of a fail in terms of, the thing about political appointees, your fortune rises and falls with the electorate. So there came a time when, with my reading of the tea leaves, I'm like, I don't think we're going to win this next election. So fortunately for me, I have the ability to alternate before what's in front of me immediately. So the operational and tactical work and the more strategic work. Yes. So I sort of read the tea leaves a couple of years before the election was due.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, the time to move is now, not after the election, but now.
Yeah.
And so when the contract was offered to be renewed, I said, no, thank you. I'm gonna move at this point. And there were still, 2 years left in the term. So they were like, why? But I again realized that, well, it was a risk. I knew it was a risk going in, because of the financial collapse. There's just so much that went wrong.
Yeah.
Not because of the government, because there, the global financial collapse,
Yes.
the Stanford financial group, it's happening in Antigua, the Bico, the Clee. There were just so many things that went wrong that made it difficult for an incumbent government.
Yeah.
And I said, just bad timing, and you're going to be a casualty of all these things having gone wrong. And so how then do I move forward? Because I left the private sector in a very public way, because I went to work with the prime minister of the country. Yeah. So, I mean, it was a known story. What do I do now? What's Act 2?
Right.
Or maybe Act 3, because it was my Act 2. Where do you go from here? And so, God is just so good that the timing was fantastic, because I said, well, I'll start consulting full time. And just as I was making that transition, I was offered an opportunity to manage a regional project funded by the Canadian government. So in terms of what on the face of it could have been perceived as a fail,
right,
catapulted me onto a regional platform. The project covered, I think, about 12 CARICOM countries, and I was the one in the region responsible for managing it. So while it was a fail in terms of it didn't end up the way I had planned it to end up when I made the move initially, like I said, the lessons that I extracted and working in the office of the Prime Minister was a fantastic experience. And Prime Minister Baldwin Spencer, who is one of my mentors and a sponsor, just having that time with him and learning from him was, fantastic. So even though it didn't end the way I would have liked for it to end, where I would have fully executed all the projects that he had asked me to come on board to execute, I frankly would not have had it any other way. Right. Because I think had I been successful in the original remit, I would not have ended up managing the regional project. Yes. And that again catapulted me into an even bigger stage where I am now.
Yeah. The one thing I'd love to take away from what you said was early on, where you talked about being forward thinking, because, and it springs to mind because quite recently I was on LinkedIn and somebody had asked the question about something along as being prepared, and she described where she'd worked for a company for a long, long time, and out of the blue, she was severed, and that was it. She was talking about whether it's about does your title define who you are?
Yes.
And there was a very lengthy discussion in the comments, which was great.
Yes, I remember that post.
Yeah, and it was which was great. But what I liked about, and one of the things that struck me, and I'm very much the same as you, is that there's a level. I think sometimes you get settled in a role, and there's in an organization, there's a level of complacency per se, and I like the fact that you're strategically thinking about your future. Personally, I've never stayed in a role much longer than 4 years, and the last organization I worked for was the longest I've ever worked for an organization, and even then it was like, okay, I'm here too long, I never planned this, so I've always been thinking ahead.
And that is so important, because a lot of folks do get blindsided.
Yes.
And, like you, I go through these cycles. So I typically have a 3-year cycle. Nice. Then I start getting antsy. Yeah. I've stretched it out to like 7, and I did 9 one time, but I was miserable for the last 2. So I know that I'm not supposed to do it that long. So even when I took over and I was managing that regional project, so again, it was a startup. So I did everything from setting up the office, buying furniture, hiring all the staff,
Yeah.
ensuring all the standard operating procedures were in place. And then 3 years in, I resigned.
Right.
And nobody saw it coming.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And they were like, why? And
Yeah.
I was like, I'm ready for another challenge. No, I remained associated with the project,
Yeah.
but in another role as a facilitator. I'm like, I don't want to be the regional project manager anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I think so that's me. I don't allow myself to get complacent in any role.
Yeah.
So, but.
And I was going to say, I also think from what I've heard, because I'm hearing a lot of women thinking right now, especially through the pandemic period, looking at their life thinking, is this it? Is this, or they're having to return to work thinking, I don't want to return to work. But there's an element of fear about making that change, about coming out of that comfort zone. I tell people to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. That's a whole nother story.
Yes.
But what would you advise a woman who's thinking their career right now, thinking, I'd like to make a move, but I'm a little fearful right now?
So it depends on your circumstances. I've been fortunate in terms of my personal life, having that kind of flexibility.
Right.
All right. So for most of my professional life, I've been single.
Yeah.
So in terms of my decision making, I have nieces and nephews, which is like the best invention in the world, because you get, all the love and the opportunity to contribute to helping to groom them. But you're not that responsible that you can't decide, I'm going to, pull up stakes and move on to take on a new challenge. So it depends on those things. But even within those constraints, what I would say is to spend some time in deep introspection in order to identify what really feeds your soul.
Yeah.
Because one of the benefits of being our age is that I don't take gigs that don't excite me.
Yes. Yeah.
If I can't get up in the morning and be excited about going to my desk to work on this, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
I did that when I was coming on.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're going to pivot and take on a considerable risk, make sure it's about something that you're passionate about. Right? Because the money mightn't start coming right away. So you need the psychic income to keep you going until the money does start to come.
Yeah.
So take some time, really think deeply about your values, your personal values. What's your purpose? And how can you marry that with the thing that you do to earn a living? And I think once you can bring those two together, and I really do believe, and this has been my lived experience, that put that with some faith and you'll be all right.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you for that. So we're coming down to our last few questions, Joan. Thank you. We'll get you at the hot seat soon. So share with us a success quote or a mantra that you use and why it's meaningful to you.
Okay, so mine it's biblical, and I'll tell you what it is and then why it's so important to me. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. All things. And that speaks to me on a professional level, as well as speaking to me on a personal level, because I've had a number of health challenges.
Right.
I have thyroid disease. I have a brain tumor, a benign brain tumor, albeit, and I'm a cancer survivor. And for each diagnosis, it was traumatic.
Right.
Right? And life-changing and potentially devastating.
Right.
And the fact that I have 3 really complicated medical issues and none of them have had the worst possible outcome or even a medium bad outcome. The outcomes have been all good.
Yeah.
And so I really believe that part of that is just God's grace and mercy. Because I mean, I remember when I was diagnosed with my brain tumor, there was someone else within the organization who got a diagnosis around the same time.
Right.
Not the same diagnosis, but
Yes.
another type of brain tumor.
Yeah.
And when I look at how my prognosis played out compared to how hers, and I said, you know, it's just the grace of God. Because, and somebody who's a knowledge worker, to be told that there's something growing in your brain that shouldn't be there,
Yes.
it's a really scary conversation to have and reality to confront.
Yeah.
So I have come through those 3 potentially catastrophic diagnoses, and I'm in reasonably good health today, praise God. And I've taken on, you know, challenging jobs, and have been able to hold my own or better in them. And so that, for me, is something that I hold on to. And it's even mentioned in my book.
Excellent. And thank you so much for being so open and candid and sharing that with us. So, Joan, what advice would you give to your 75-year-old self?
My 75-year-old self, knowing myself at almost 60 now, I still have a few years to go, but I love saying I'm almost 60. I'm claiming it. I would say to my 75-year-old self, get up and go for a walk.
Okay. Why?
Because part of what I just shared with you, my health challenges, and because I made certain changes in my lifestyle, so it's now part of my routine that at least 5 days a week I'm doing something. Not so much the gym anymore because of COVID and because of my other health conditions. I've decided not to go back into the gym just yet. So right now I'm walking or doing videos at home. And so sometimes it's hard to start, but then once I start doing it, I'm always very pleased that I did. So that's what I would tell my 75-year-old self: get up and start walking or exercising. You'll feel better.
Fantastic. And it's very, very true, because you just have to get up and go. Just get one foot out the door. That's it. And the rest will follow. And the rest will definitely follow.
I'll tell you a little hack, though, because I love to sleep.
Yes.
And if I don't work out in the morning, it's not going to happen. People who do it in the evening, I tip my hat to them, but I'm not one of those people. And so in terms of the discipline and forming new habits, and this is something really important for us to understand in order to be successful with or without the pivots. For me to form that new habit of getting up and exercising every morning, it just took one little change. I used to keep my alarm next on the night table next to the bed. And so I would reach over and snooze it, of course.
Yes.
I moved it across the room. So when that alarm goes off, I have to turn it off. I have to get up, get out of the bed, walk over to my dressing table where I now keep the alarm.
Yes.
And once I'm up, I'm not going to snooze it and go back to bed. So that's how it became a habit to get up and go exercise every morning.
Great piece of advice. Great piece of advice. I have 4 dogs that let me know it's time to go for a walk in the morning, you know. So, but yeah, I'm not sure if I take that on the alarm clock, but either way, it gets me out of bed. So, Joan, where would we find you typically on a Saturday morning at 10 a.m.?
Now, I know you asked this question, and I said, oh my God, my answer is going to be so boring. But I will be home doing laundry.
Okay. It's got to be done sometime, I suppose.
And the thing is, I actually find I enjoy doing laundry. I find it therapeutic. The mindless routine of sorting and doing the pre-wash and it's thinking time for me. So I can do a lot of reflection in terms of what would have happened during the week. You know, things that I should be doing differently, things that didn't get done. That's my Saturday morning.
Well, that's fine. We're not judging you. We are not judging you. So, Joan, that was my last question. But if people would like to know more about, get in touch with you, know more about your book, how can they do that?
Okay, so my primary platform in social media would be LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And so you can just search me by name, Joan H Underwood. And I am very active on LinkedIn, daily posting. And my posting content is to help persons maximize their potential. I have a community of followers called Maximizers. We're not perfect, but what we do commit to is putting in the effort every day to get the best possible outcomes. So you can join us and get those tips and strategies. Also over on Instagram, and again, it's my name at joan.h.underwood. And I'm also on Facebook, not my preferred medium, but you can find me there and you can look. I have a business page and a personal page. So the personal page would be my company name, and that's Underwood Talent Development Services. And of course, the personal page, you can just look for my name. My website, you can get the book there as well as on Amazon, and it's also available in local bookstores in Antigua, in Barbados, and in Dominica and Jamaica. But you can buy it on Amazon or directly from me on my website. And my website is UTDS, which is the acronym for Underwood Talent Development Services. And I have a blog, a bi-monthly blog. You can find that on the website. I also post it on the various social media platforms. So say hi and let me know if there are topics that you would like to have me address. I have a couple new books coming out in September. I'm bringing out the workbook for Manager's First Aid Kit, which is my substantive text. And the demand for the workbook, I did not start out with the intention, but it has a lot of reflection and other activities in it. And so I've developed that into a workbook. And then another problem that people complain about, a major pain point, is managing time. And frankly speaking, I don't think you can manage time. So that's another pivot. Okay. So I developed a system of managing priorities as opposed to managing time.
Yes. Yeah.
So I've developed it into a 10-point system, and I'm going to be launching that in September.
Excellent. Well, there's no flies on you. You're going to keep on being busy and pivoting, Joan. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a delight speaking with you.
Same here. Thanks so much again for the invitation and for all the work you're doing in encouraging women that you can, we can.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. Thank you.